All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we bring back Del Tackett for the final offering of his series, The 7 Threats in Our Times. This is the attack upon the biblical family. Del, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thank you, Greg. It's great to be with you.
Well, I kind of wish at this point this has been so well received and so many good comments back on what we've done here so far. I wish we had a threat 8 and a threat 9 and a threat 10.
Well, there are.
There are. Okay. Well, maybe we can talk about doing those as well down the road.
7 is a good complete number, right?
Yeah. Kind of bittersweet here, and it's ending on number 7 here, but it's such an important one. This one is the attack upon the biblical family. And it's very obvious to me as I go through a number of these current ideologies that we see in our culture, that all of them seem to attack the family. Is that something that you see as well?
I agree with that. And in particular, this demonic worldview we talked back in one of the earlier threats has really fundamentally at its core, as Marx and Engels said, that they wanted to abolish the family. And that is at the core, I think, of what Satan wants to do. His ultimate scheme is to destroy relationships because relationships bring forth fruit. That's how God designed everything. And that fruit brings him glory. So Satan wants to destroy and cut off the glory that is due to God. And there is no greater way, there's no greater institution that God has created outside of the biblical family.
So I think we brought this up before on one of the other threats here, but I go back to the simplicity that seems almost, might receive a yawning reaction from us normally, maybe even 10 years ago, of the beginning of Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
And where it's like, well, yeah, duh. I mean, of course, there's a man and there's a woman and they're made in the image of God, and, multiply and be fruitful. Common sense, right? It's like, well, what's the big deal here? But maybe through time, it seems to me, in different civilizations where these truths are lost, the very fundamental, basic truths of man and woman and marriage and family are lost. This is not just a matter of, hey, here's the story and let's show you how things started out. But in some ways, it almost seems in our time to be a warning as well.
Yes.
Of, look, this is simple. This is the order of God. Keep it simple.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we began these whole threats talking about the rise of Homo Deus, and that once man throws off God and restraints associated with the fact that we are subject to God, that God is God. He is the creator. And not only has he given us commands for our good, but he has created a universe that works in accordance with his design, I think a reflection of his very nature. And when we go against that nature, we're going to run into trouble. I tell this story all the time, but I remember the first time I went skiing. I had no lessons at all. My brother-in-law said, let's go skiing. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go up the little bunny slope there. And there was, there was these little rods that came down that looked like a handlebar. And so I'm holding on to this handlebar, and this is really hard. I mean, if this is the bunny slope for beginners, you've got to be an athlete, to be able to do that. And people started yelling, put it between your legs. Well, when I put it between my legs, wow, okay, this worked well. So, it's just like you can't try to climb a mountain with a boat. The design of God is made for our benefit, for our good. And if you bump up and try to change that design and go your own way, you're going to run into all kinds of problems. And that is exactly what's happening in our culture, because we are throwing off fundamentally back to the whole human sexuality, throwing that out, which is the fundamental basis that God created for the family, and it is going to destroy us.
You say in here, and this is an obvious truth, that, looking first at just even society, building a civilization, you talked about how, basically that the family is the building block of a culture, of a society. So on one side of this, the consequences of this, which are dire in on many different levels, but one of the consequences is the society itself, the culture itself. When you break the family down, the culture is going to change. And principles that hold up, like pillars, a culture, are going to erode.
Yes.
And so if you can attack the family from all these different angles, then you're basically attacking society. You're going to bring the society down. Does that seem
Yes.
right
And
to
I
you?
think that is exactly the enemy's attempt and what he's trying to do. This is his modus operandi, is to destroy relationships. And the fundamental institution that God has created that reflects his nature, the deepest, most intimate of relationships, and the institution that produces good workers. It produces, the statesman with integrity. It produces moms and dads. It produces all the things that society needs. It comes out of that biblical family. So if the enemy can destroy that, then, well, we see the reality to that, for example, in our cities, in our inner cities, for example, where young boys are growing up without that biblical family and the stability and everything that it brings, and they get sucked into gangs and all kinds of crime and so forth. It's not hard to see the result of what happens when you throw out the biblical family.
Well, and honestly, I mean, when you throw men out of the family, if you're going to bring up children and you want to do it on your own as a single mother, there's obviously that empathy for anyone that has to do that, anyone that's in that position. And usually there's a community that's going to support her and hopefully and help her do what she needs to do. But to do it by design, which is what we've moved into, I don't need a man. It is a common thing. I was at a graduation ceremony at ASU several years ago, and there are these girls in graduation, students that were talking just within earshot, and that was the discussion. Where are we going from now? What are we doing? Well, I don't need a man, was what one of them said. And so she's moving toward her career, and then maybe she can have kids on her own. And that seems to me to be a major problem that we face today. And there is a momentum to this that is broadcast through media. It's in the news. It's part of the culture today.
Yeah, it is. And this goes back again to this homo deus. And what we've done is we've taken human sexuality that God created for the purpose, as we read in Malachi. Why did God, make them one? Because he was seeking godly offspring. So this is the design of God. He creates male and female. He brings them together. They produce offspring and raise up godly offspring as a result of that. But in the world in which we live today, where it's all about me, and I am, in essence, the divine right of God marching on the earth, that now my sexuality has been severed from that institution that God created. And so now my sexuality becomes my identity. It becomes who I am. It's separate. This is so contrary to the biblical understanding of human sexuality. So it's like the old Helen Reddy song, I am invincible, I am woman. Well, okay, she is a woman, but in the words, what she's declaring is my sexuality has nothing to do with family. It has nothing to do with the relationships that God established. It is my identity. And so now, of course, I can make my identity whatever I want. And so, we have Miley Cyrus, who declares she's pansexual. She can be anything on the continuum of sexuality that she wants. And so she is declaring, as much of our culture is yelling at us and to our kids, that your sexuality is your identity. Boy, when we took that step, yeah, I mean, we took the leap off of the cliff.
Well, it seems that, of all things, if there was something that you wanted to remove the bridle from, right, to make all hell break loose, so to speak, no pun intended, right, that it would be sexuality. I mean, here's this desire that comes with mankind, and if I can pull the bridle off of that, and that desire is within each of us, if I can pervert that in a way that says this is you and you can be whoever you want to be, then that natural desire that we already have, instead of being channeled through a certain order, is now thrown out into a chaotic world, and that creates just more and more chaos.
Yes, it is. And we've talked before about this drive for significance. And I think these are all bound up here in a very intimate way. So when I lose the significance that should come to me based on being a child of God, based upon walking in accordance of the way that he has designed for me, and that includes this notion of male and female and family and so forth, and I go my own way, I am cut off from true significance. And so what we want to do now is to make my human sexuality the source of my significance. And so maybe I'll come up with a whole new word or a whole new pronoun or whatever it is to draw attention to myself, in my divine sort of nature. But ultimately, Greg, I think what we're looking at here is the attack, I believe, upon the very nature of God, because God is a socially complex God, and we see throughout the entire universe, everything that he created in relationship. These diverse pieces and parts brought together in a relationship. We look at the atom itself, the fundamental elements of an atom. These are all diverse pieces and parts, and yet God made them to be together in such a way that they become the building block of the entire universe. The same is true with the family. We have these three elements. We have the male, the female, and the children, all brought together in this very intimate relationship and system, if you want to call it a social system that was designed by God, just like we see in the entire universe. And so to attack that is to attack the very character and nature of God.
Yeah, and it seems you reference Matthew 19:3-5 here. So you've got, Jesus is going to try and pull things back basically to Genesis again, right to the very simple beginning, right? The Pharisees come to him, they say, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? This was happening during that time. There was a lot of putting away of their wives, and again, the homo deus that is happening at that time. But he comes back and refers back to Genesis. He says that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. That is the simple order that we're supposed to follow. And he's trying to pull that back again and say, look, go back to the beginning. Look at the beginning. This is the order. If we break out of the order, and not everybody can always have that. I mean, I grew up in a family where my parents divorced when I was 6. And my dad got remarried a couple of years later. With my mom, there were 3 kids. With my stepmom, there were 4 more kids. It's not the ideal order that you would find, but you know what you do. And my parents all did this. They strived for the ideal. They strive for the right order. And so you create a family where now the 7 of us kids are all just brothers and sisters. And my parents sacrificed to work for that and to build all of that so that those relationships could be sound. So there are not always the ideal situations, but there is an ideal. Yes. And just because you don't have the ideal situation doesn't mean that you forfeit the idea or the advocacy for the truth and for the order.
Yeah. And this is the reality of living in a fallen world. So there is divorce. as much as we would like for that not to happen because of just the huge impact that occurs. My parents divorced when I was a teenager. It was a huge impact.
Mhm.
But people die, and moms are left sometimes with kids, or dads are left. I have very dear friends of mine that many men losing their wives. I don't know what's going on, but they're now put in this situation. But just as you said, if you have the ideal in front of you, even though maybe you've lost a leg, right, or maybe you've lost an eye or something like that, if you lose a spouse, the ideal should drive us then as the community. So if there's a single mom who's now a widow and she has little kids, it should drive us as the community to say, those kids need a male influence in their life. And so I have a responsibility to come alongside her from the standpoint of being able to say, can I help? Can I take your son out to the ball game today? Or can I take him fishing or something like that? Why? Because, as you said, we have the ideal in front of us. We don't cast it off, and we don't say, well, I'm a woman and I can have kids on my own, and that's the ideal I'm going to make. Well, it's not going to be an ideal, and it won't work out well for either you or the culture.
Yeah. Going back to the sexuality issue, because it's so prevalent today. I have said for a long time, I've studied these philosophies for 11 years now. And I call this identitarianism. It's because it's raising, like you say, that identity of sexuality or sexual orientation, or even, male and female, whatever it is. Identitarianism is raising the value of these other identities above the identity of a child of God, right? And I've said during that time, identitarianism's focus, its objective, is to destroy the traditional family. Mm-hmm. And it's very obvious when you look at this. And this is why, there are a number of people that will, for example, I have friends that will put up a pride flag, whether it's on social media or on their lawn, and they've got a family member who says that they're gay or lesbian or trans, whatever it is, right? And it's innocent for them. They do it in an innocent manner. I will not have anything to do with the pride flag for this very reason, because to me, ultimately, it's an emblem of identitarianism and advocacy for raising these identities above the identity of being a child of God. Is that something that is, that you would agree with?
I would, and bound up in that is the whole desire for it all to be about me, right? In this self-centered way. That's what leads to what you're talking about, right? That I'm going to hold myself up above everything else, and my desires and my wants, my will become primary. And so if I want to have sex this way, then I want not only to be able to do it freely, but I want you to affirm me in that.
Yes.
Because if you don't affirm me in that, you are cutting at my significance. And if I can gain the power, the political power, and I can gain the power of the megaphone with media and entertainment, and I can gain all of those, then I will force you, I will make you bow the knee in order to affirm me. And that's exactly where we are. So yes, I absolutely agree. That's what's happening.
It's interesting how that model works, right? When you've got a hegemonic, right? I've got air quotes here, a hegemonic order, or that is based, quite frankly, in our society off of Christianity, off of a biblical worldview. And you need to pull that down. So how do you start with that? Well, you start with saying tolerance. We need tolerance. And then it moves to acceptance. And then it moves to advocacy. And then it moves to, I'm going to lance accusations and pejorative names and at you if you don't support this. And that's what's happened as we've gone through this identitarianism evolution. over the last number of years, that really is founded very simply, if you really study this, is founded in Marx and Engels declaring abolish the family. It is all part of the same kind of DNA of these other ideologies that go right back to that idea of we need to abolish the family, put the state in place of the family.
Mhm. Yeah, and Marx and Engels, is from my perspective, and not just mine, but many other perspectives, that Marx had a great deal of demonic influence. I don't know how far that was. I can't make that judgment. But all we have to do is look and see the millions and millions of people that have been slaughtered at the throne of Marxism, and that demonic aspect of the worldview of Marxism is to destroy every system that God has established. And the primary one is the family. That's why they wanted to abolish the family, because it recognized and it established authority and submission and relationships and institutions that reflected the very nature and character of God, and it had to be to destroy. And along with all of the other institutions that God has created, and even Marx, in the end, even the state itself, which seems strange to people, they think, why isn't communism, centered on the state? Well, no, Marxism leads to this communism where there is no state. So even Marxism was attempting to destroy, as we read in Romans 13, the institution that God had instituted. The proper biblical understanding of the state is going to be destroyed by Marx. The proper biblical understanding of the sphere of labor and work is going to be destroyed by Marx. And the family, the design of the family, and of course the church. I mean, he was adamant to destroy the church, and he hated the church, and he hated God. But the family represented the fundamental institution that reflected the nature of God, and he wanted to destroy it. And that's why, and people don't, this, but a lot of people don't catch this. When the Black Lives Matter website first went up, they declared we're trained Marxists, and on the website was abolish the family.
Yes.
Well, I mean, they had to take that down because of public relations issues, but that goes along with Marxism and that worldview.
And their identitarianism. They're very much identitarian. They're very seeped in intersectionality and critical race theory, etc. So it's all part of the same machine that's moving forward. Now you talk about not needing the state, right? That's because you can become the new man, is what they used to say. Right. You can become, if we can become those types of, it's like a counterfeit of a Christian worldview where we need to be new creatures in God. They want you to be new creatures in their utopia, right? Where you become the new man, the Soviet new man that you could talk about. And, then you don't need the state because we're all so self-sufficient. We've all broken all of the shackles of including religion and commandments and morality. And once we have achieved this, then we all arrive at this utopia that the same religion, and I call it a religion because it is still pushing and advocating for today, that sprouts out of academia, which is why I call it the religion of academia. They are still pushing the exact same thing in a new iterations, which is focusing on the culture, focusing on identitarianism, so that we can get to a point where we can get rid of this family and focus on the homo deus, as you say, on each individual instead of the family.
But it's a scam. The whole thing is nothing but a scam. And all you have to do is take a look at any of the, we call China a communist country. It really isn't communist because they haven't reached that utopia. They haven't reached the new man state. And so, until we reach that, we have to have this very totalitarian state, of which I will be the head of, and I will have a big palace, and you will live in slum. It's like we found in East Berlin. East Berlin was a gray world of poverty, only interrupted by the palaces of the Marxist egalitarian. So it's nothing but a scam. We try to tell people, look, even today, if you overthrow this white supremacy, back then it was if you overthrow this bourgeoisie, then you will gain all. Well, that's a scam. They didn't gain anything except poverty and a gray world. And the same is true today. I mean, look at North Korea. It's a scam, but we're buying it. I mean,
hook, line, and sinker.
Yes, it has just infiltrated every aspect of our culture, and we're buying it. Why? Because we are so selfish that we buy the lie that if I overthrow this, then there's some utopia at the end of the rainbow here for me, and it's a lie.
One of the other reasons, I think, that one of the primary reasons I look at with this religion of academia and these Marxian tenets, with the new iteration that came through the Frankfurt School of critical theory, where that critical theory is basically Marxism, but it moves more toward culture. The issue is so anti-Christian because it says with critical theory, we're going to have an oppressor and a victim class. Those are two sides. And what this does is it says, hey, I want to incentivize you to be a victim because we're going to hurl accusations at the oppressors. And you certainly don't want to be a part of that group. So we're going to incentivize you to become a victim. And then we're going to go after the oppressors. Well, what this does is it says the problem is out there. The problem is always out there. We want justice, but the justice doesn't apply to you as a victim. The justice applies to the oppressors. And therefore, I move to a temporal justice instead of a spiritual justice, which should be found in myself. Right? What am I doing? Am I repenting? Am I doing what's right? Am I following the commandments? Am I being moral? That justice should rely, that should be something that I carry with myself, trying to follow the justice of God. But if I can push that off, if I can get rid of my personal responsibility and say, no, the problem is out there, I've just destroyed the whole purpose of the mission of Christ. I've just destroyed the whole idea of Christianity because I don't have an issue. I don't have a problem. I don't have to worry about my decisions.
Right. Yeah, there's no repentance required in the Marxist form. Even a repentance for the bourgeoisie, there's no repentance there. We'll destroy you, right? There is no I guess. I mean, we're trying the whole reparations maybe, but that it won't matter. That will never be enough because it's all a scam. As we've just said. But you're exactly right, because Christianity will and Christ will come to say you need a savior, and the reason you need a savior is because you are fallen and you are sinful. You cannot stand in the presence of a holy God. There's nothing you can do to make yourself right, and that's why Christ. But it's based upon the understanding that I fall short before God. But Marx wants to come and say, no, you are perfect. Actually, you are godlike. It's these people who are oppressing you. So blame, it's a culture of blame. It's never a culture that looks at me and says, maybe there's something wrong in my life because I have made bad choices. And so, our current culture is separating and destroying the ability to connect the dots between my actions and the consequences of my actions, and training me to simply look at, the hegemonic power. That is the source of all of my problems. It is not me at all. If I smoke marijuana and I don't feel like working, and then I end up not being able to pay my rent, it's not my problem. It's those oppressive landowners.
The systemic issues.
Right. And yeah, it is so demonic. It's demonic all the way from beginning to end.
Yeah. So going beyond these ideologies, there are also the traditional sins that always have attacked the family from the very beginning. I wanted to go over a couple of these you talk about, that you say this, you say, despite basically, despite these other objectives of Marxism and these ideologies, you say one may argue that they don't really have to do anything except sit back and watch, because we are destroying the family ourselves. One of the things you bring up with this is media, but you talk about pornography, which is just so unbelievably mainstream today. It is nothing. It is it used to be that if some teenage boy was trying to hide a magazine from a convenience store, it was like this big issue of shame, and it was a major issue. But today, access to pornography is at the push of a button, and it's everywhere.
Right. It is. And again, this is the cheapening of this glorious thing that God has done in the design of male and female, and the human sexuality, and the design associated with the man and the woman coming together in that intimate relationship and involving sexuality. Would we destroy that, then sex itself becomes cheap. It becomes a product. It becomes a source of pleasure for myself. And so, the thing that just so disconcerting to me, I saw a list. I think it was a younger generation list of what they thought was, the worst thing. It was almost a list of moral concerns and so forth. And watching pornography was like it was almost as if it wasn't considered to be wrong. Recycling was like number 2 or number 3. If you don't recycle, that is a moral, you have become immoral if you don't. But if you watch pornography, there's really no moral value at all. I mean, you're just satisfying your desire. Like if you want to play golf or play tennis or watch pornography and so forth. It is a degrading of the precious thing that God has given to us.
Yeah, again, it's moving something that is spiritual, a spiritual morality, down to making a temporal issue more important, like recycling, right? No one argues that recycling is a good thing. Okay, great. But when you're replacing spiritual characteristics and spiritual growth and spiritual truths with temporal, it's like the identitarianism. You're putting everything upside down.
Yes.
Another one that you've got in here is feminism. I'm going to quote you here. It's destroying both the virtuous female and the noble male, as we've spoken previously. Indeed, the young male in our culture today is overwhelmingly pressed by one mandate. You will be accepted only if you become more feminine in character, thought, and deed. Your maleness is toxic, I hear that all the time, out of favor, and you will be rejected unless you conform. In fact, it may be accurate to concede that the overall bent of our culture is deeply feministic. No question that we were moving into a very feminized culture. What if I was playing the devil's advocate here, Dylan, and I said, what's wrong with being a little more feminine in our culture? We've been more male in our culture previously. What's wrong with being more feminine?
Well, there isn't anything wrong with being feminine if you're feminine. That's the whole issue here. What we're trying to do is destroy the design of God when he created male, when he created the noble male. It's not just a little tweak here that we're talking about. We're talking about throwing out the noble male. I mean, getting rid of the noble male and destroying the virtuous female and hanging on to what those things we call feminine today, which has resulted, as we've spoken earlier, of the prime ethic of compassion. And that compassion, our view is that compassion is not found in the male, which is wrong. That's a lie. And that true compassion is unbridled. It's unbridled by any moral law. It's unbridled by anything that God declares to be right and wrong, or unbridled by the social systems that he has designed. And so it becomes a tool in the hand of the elites to make compassion our prime example. So everything that goes on today, whether you're talking about the border crisis, whether you're talking about the individual who wants to declare themselves to be a man or woman or something in between or something, everything now is judged by the prime ethic of compassion, which we, wrongly associate with the virtuous female. But the virtuous female has compassion, but it's bridled. And so this whole move to a feministic world is not just tweaking a little bit. We've got a little bit too much male here. Let's move. It's not at all. It's the destruction of the noble male.
It seems to me that you could look at the women, though, also and say that their femininity is being destroyed at the same time. For example, you've got there's a show that my wife and I are watching right now, and there are these women, and they're kind of in powerful political positions, and it's amazing what they're doing with them. I mean, they've got them from the makeup to the fashion to the characteristics. Everything about them is extremely male and I'm not even talking about, I'm not talking about being in a powerful position. I mean, just everything about them, their aura, everything about them is very masculine. And it seems that part of that breaking down of the family is focusing on the breakdown of gender, the breakdown of biological sex, and taking the femininity of the power, the virtuous power of women, and destroying their femininity, and taking the nobility of the masculine man and destroying that at the same time, and trying to create some kind of an androgynous type of person where there are no complements of male to female and female to male. And that is a flattening of the hierarchy to me. That is a flattening of order. That is trying to create a glob of chaos out and trying to extract it out of order.
Yeah, it is. It's the destruction of both of these. We talk about the virtuous female and the noble male. It's the destruction of both of those. Why? Because that is how God has designed it. That's how He wants. And so I think you've nailed it, really, when you talk about it's an attempt to try and smash everything into one kind of an androgynous being that we make. God doesn't make it; we make it. And so it turns out in the end that both men and women are going to suffer because I think God places within us an understanding, just like He's written on our hearts, an understanding of what a male should be pursuing. The noble male should pursue that which is good and righteous and beautiful. The noble male is the one who stands on the deck of the Titanic and sings a hymn, having gotten the women and the children in the lifeboats. That's what he's made for. He's made for that nobility. The virtuous female is made by God in all of her beauty, and yet her wisdom and her prudence. We see this in Proverbs 31. She is a strong person, and the enemy wants to destroy that and create his own in his own image. I guess you could almost say, creating a creature in his own image, and it, the bottom line here, Greg, is that we can talk about these things from a little bit of a theoretical position and so forth, but the reality is we're talking about the destruction of men and women and children and a culture that should be one that nurtures children and nurtures people and provides for them the means by which they can be fruitful and bring glory to God. It will destroy all of that.
Now, you had mentioned in your article on this that you had an experience visiting a large Christian school. Tell us about that.
Yeah, this was probably, there are a lot of things that concern people, who have a biblical worldview, but this just struck me. So I was speaking at a Christian academy, K through 12, and it's probably one of the best in the nation, honestly, in terms of their integration of a biblical worldview. It just was incredible. And I wanted to address each of the faculties, the upper level, middle level, and then what we used to call grade school. I don't know, the elementary, lower level grade. And I was asking them similar questions when I was dealing with the lower level faculty. One of the questions I asked them, I said, what is the number one issue that you're facing? And it was almost spontaneous from the faculty: gender identity. And it struck me. I said, these are Christian families mostly. It's a Christian school that's teaching well, and yet these kids, we're talking about first grade, second grade, and so forth. They are being bombarded, not out of the family. It's not coming from their family, and it's not coming from the school. It's where it's coming from, and it's coming from the world, the media world, the entertainment world, that is constantly telling them, in order for you to be significant, in order for you to find satisfaction and where you are, you must find your place on this gender continuum. And it has just been driven into their minds. That just crushed me. It crushed me because I realized, we now live in a world, you can't live in a bubble anymore in a world. You can have a Christian family, you can send them to Christian school, but if you allow them the portal to the world through, and I don't mean to hold this up as this, but this and other things have opened up our children and family, to the mantra of the world that pounds on them from every quarter constantly. And that was a difficult moment.
Yeah, for me, looking at social media and kids, and an iPhone, if I had kids that young today, I would never give them a phone. Right. They'll have a flip phone and that's it. I just, the stats, especially on young girls that have an iPhone or on social media, the depression, the anxiety, the pressures, the information that, you're giving the world access to your kids.
Yes.
That's what you're doing. You're giving the world access to your kids when you do this. I had a recent interview with a couple that have a teenage daughter that is now coming out as transgender. And, this is a girl that, played with princess dolls and wore tutus and ballerina, the whole feminine side of things her whole life. But after she had access to the internet and a couple of other people in her friend circle, then she started changing quite a bit and moving toward this ideology. It's not just a matter of who you are, it is an ideology that you're following. And there is this mass social contagion with teenage girls and early 20-something-year-old women, where they've shown through studies that just through your friend circle, there would be this abnormal, about 70 times the number of girls that came out as non-binary or transgender were with a friend circle. And it is very obvious this was a contagion. Ideology had grabbed onto that. And it's so hard, Bill, now in thinking about parents. What do you do? Because do you have the one side? In fact, I think this topic came up at an event you and I were both at. Do you isolate your kid from the world? Do you pull them out and say, it's a doomsday and we're not going to, we're going to shelter them completely? Or do you say, well, maybe they can be a positive influence in the world and put them out there further, and hopefully they can help be a light out there in this darkness? But do you risk that with kids? And the whole idea of, for me, what I try to do with the podcast is say, look, you have to have awareness. I don't think we live in a world anymore where you can just put your head in the sand, in my mind. I don't think you can do that. I think you have to preemptively strike, so to speak. You have to go out and teach your kids proper principles and say, hey, this is something that may come up. Let's talk about this. And hear it, I think, from a parent and not from a school teacher or a friend or, somebody on social media. What do you make of all that?
Well, I absolutely agree. In other words, I think more than ever, parents have got to talk about sex with their kids. I'm not talking about intercourse. I'm talking about God has made you, and he's made you for a special reason and a special purpose. If you're talking to a young boy, to say, this is what a noble male is. This is how God has made you. That you have been made. You may be called to sacrifice someday, but that is what you're made for. You're made for sacrifice. You're made to pursue righteousness. You're made to pursue that which is good and true and beautiful. That is who you are. And we talk to our little girls the same way. This is how God has made you. He's made you to be a virtuous female. And so we have to objectively teach them. But my personal opinion, and I know that there are other people who have different opinions. In fact, we heard some of those in the event we were at, that your kids need to be light and salt. And I would say, well, yeah, but we don't send a 3-year-old off to war. You're foolish to send a 6-year-old boy or a 6-year-old girl to the front lines in World War II or whatever. It's crazy, because they aren't able to. They are going to be picked off, and so I think more than ever, parents have got to recognize the danger associated with the public school, the danger associated with the public media and the portal. I think I may have mentioned this in our earlier podcast, but it's like putting your kids to bed and then open up all the windows and doors in the house if you're in the middle of the city, and you're just allowing all of that to come in. And we have to put up those guards, but we also have to teach them and train them. So this is what we read in the scripture. You teach these things to your children, when you're walking in the way, when you're sitting down, wherever you go, we're teaching them. We have to build that biblical worldview in our children.
Yeah, it's a tough time we live in. It really is a tough time. And it just requires more effort. Mm-hmm. It requires more effort, and we need to know that. You cannot sit back and just let these things happen. It requires more effort to live in this time. Finally here, Del, you say that it's clear the blessings of God are from a traditional family. Nearly all of what we would call positive social indicators are related to a strong family life, from emotional wellness, to psychological wellness, to social health. Intact families provide the primary disability to keep someone out of poverty. These are all, there are social studies that are done on this ad nauseum. It's all much more positive, economically, emotionally, stability for the kids, stability for the parents. When there is a partnership with the parents put into place of saying, we are going to raise a family and bring these kids up. Yeah. We've been so distracted from that very simple mission, those very simple words given in Genesis. We've been drawn into the window of Babylon, I suppose, and it's this distraction that says, look, what is most important in our lives? What is the most important thing? It's your family members that we have here on earth. Why would we focus on anything else than the model that has been given to us by God to follow that order and to produce more stability, a better economic situation, perhaps, more spirituality? in the home and more strength to the children by focusing on a traditional family.
Yeah, I had the privilege for many years to teach college students in a special semester where we brought students from all over, and also had the privilege to do a lot of one-on-one with them. And it's where I began to notice, I think I knew it before, but the reality struck me, and that is that I would have a student come in and we would talk about, I'd ask about their family and so forth. And I would hear stories that would make you cry from a blessing, just talking about the deepest blessings that come to us primarily from a biblical family. And the greatest pain and the greatest misery, because I've talked to students and they've expressed it, will come from the brokenness of that biblical family. And so we have to recognize now the things that you just said you're reading from the article there about the blessings that come from the biblical family. I think we are increasingly not going to be able to speak that publicly because we will be vilified. We're approaching the point where you can be financially destroyed and maybe lose a job and so forth. Maybe even be attacked physically. But what we have to do is we need to teach our children, and we need to teach our male friends, our female friends, the design of God, and continue to encourage them and help them to build and to secure that biblical design for the family, for themselves, and for their children. So we're not going to stand in the public square and teach this. We're going to have to teach this one-on-one.
Del, well, that is the end of the series.
Okay.
Really appreciate all of this. For those of you that are watching this episode for the first time in this series, there is a whole playlist for Del Tackett on the series, 7 total different episodes. And then if you want to also see his articles, we'll put that in the description, and they're found at deltackett.com. Del, thanks so much for your input and your collaboration on all this.
Thank you, Greg. It was a pleasure to be with you, and pray the Lord's going to bless you and your family.
Thank you very much.